Hey, good evening, everybody. I know you all been patiently waiting for week one of our 6 week financial literacy plan to kick off. So tonight is the night. So welcome. Thank you all for been starting to follow me and checking in on some of the videos that I've been posting. Hope you've been enjoying them. Um, really just want to kick this off. Keep in mind this is just the first week. We're going to be going through a lot of stuff, and there will be follow ups and notes that I will be putting into the comments for you guys to work on, and you will get some homework from week to week for you to do for yourself to you know put into practice some of the things that we're talking about during the video tonight. Now, the first thing I want to kind of go over ties into something that I mentioned earlier is that you're not broke, right? You're just early. You're early to the game. A lot of us are at the point right now where coach just put us in at quarterback and nobody told us how to play football before and is expecting you to throw a touchdown, every single time. That is not going to happen. It is very hard to do. Maybe you saw a little bit from the sideline, maybe you heard about it or somebody talked about it before, but nobody ever really taught you how to score a touchdown. So how do you do it? You have no idea, you know? And that's kind of where a lot of us are with our financial playbook. We never had a full financial playbook. We never had anybody really sit down that knew what they were talking about and talk to us about our finances, how to make them better, how to increase them, what's a good strategy, what's a bad strategy, pluses and minuses of different options, and it sets us behind. We don't have these conversations around the dinner table or with our, often even with our friends and family about these sort of things. So tonight we're going to start talking about training our mindset. Some of the survival traumas that are very predominant in the black community that affect the way that your relationship with money goes off. And ultimately, this is all about reclaiming our right to wealth, right? At the end of this, we want to start putting ourselves in a better financial position, and that's what we're going to do. Um, One thing that I mentioned just now is the survival trauma. You know, um, One thing that's very common in the African American community, especially with our elders, is the habit of hiding money. You know, um, grandma, granddad, great grandma, great granddad. Um, they grew up in a time that was different. I'm not saying today is perfect. It's not by any means. And actually, in some ways, we're going back to some of their fears. But they grew up in a time where things like banks and being able to get loans and mortgages and things like that were gobbledygook. They were fairy tale. They were unicorns. They were pixie dust. They were not things that we were accustomed to having. And so, what people often did was they would hide their money in the house, right? Um, I heard a story about once that somebody told me about his great grandfather, back in like the 1920s. And, he put on his best outfit, his best suit, his best clothes, and he went to the bank and told the banker that he wanted to open a bank account. Banker said, sure. How much money do you have to deposit? He said, I've been saving for a while. I got $100. Um, so he gave the bank, his life savings of $100 at the time, and banker said, "Thank you. We'll put this off, and you'll be getting a letter in the mail from us with your account information." Wonderful. Gentleman goes back a couple weeks later, wants to take out $10, goes back to the same bank, and has his best clothes on again, and this time goes up to a different teller and says like, I'd like to withdraw my money, ma'am. She's like, sure. Do you have a bank card? He said, no, I never received one in the mail. And he proceeds to tell him, well, you should have gotten one before you left the bank, you know. And he says, I have no record of you ever opening up an account in here. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. This was the reality. This happened time and time again to even the most cautious of people back then. And what it's done is it's put a habit and a culture of us hiding money. This is where you get hiding the money in the mattress, under the floorboards, all those sort of things, to keep it safe. The other instance was if you had something, somebody else might take it. The man might be out there trying to either the slave master, whatever. You had something valuable, he wanted it, he was going to take it. So you had to take every precaution necessary to keep it yours. So often that involved hiding, valuables in odd and kind of precarious places. Moving on a little bit, some more of the setbacks that we run into and the hard times that we have is that we don't have conversations about money. It was taboo to ask somebody how much they make. It was taboo to say what you did for a living. We didn't want anybody to know that we might have had more than them or less than them. And so, these conversations never happened. As a result, we weren't learning from parent to child and child to, passing on to their kids. The lessons of how to create a budget, how to run a household, you know, what how to purchase things. These were just not conversations. We didn't talk about stocks. We didn't talk about the banks. We didn't talk about investing. It just not was what we did. We had very small segments of our population that did have these conversations, and we got some of the more prosperous towns that went up and then as we all know went back down. That we're having these conversations and doing these things, and they figured it out. They figured it out, and largely because they were in an isolated community and they were working with their own people, and so everybody was working at a level playing field. And given a level playing field, we can compete with anybody else that's out there. That's just the nature of the game. All things created equal, human beings are human beings. We all have the same 24 hours in a day. We can all get it done. Another thing that kind of came out of us being oppressed for so long is that as soon as we got anything, we spent it. It's if you're old like me, probably this was like an 80s or a 90s song. What was it? It was Just Got Paid, Friday night, money in my pocket, right? Remember that song? And so what did he do? He was going out to party. He was going to go blow all the money that he just got because he had it. He's like, oh, I got a little bit of money now. I'm going to go have some fun, enjoy myself. I deserve it. And so some of those things of delayed gratification and saving just weren't part of our culture. We also had a habit of wearing our wealth. Fancy clothes, things that were really liabilities and that were not assets. We would dump our money in those areas opposed to things that would make us more money continually. As a result, a lot of us struggled with economic dignity. If it feels like I'm jumping around a little bit, I'm going to tie these together for you. But not having conversations about money is a direct result of our feelings about economic dignity. Very often, we felt as though we were, we may have been confident in ourselves, but put us in certain rooms, we were a little bit less than confident. We weren't as self-assured. We weren't as sure of the rules that we were playing by. And as a result, we did a lot of things different. We made it work, People would start businesses, and what would you do? It was like, I got me a little business. I hate that term. I have a business that I cut lawns. I got four guys working for me. I have to pay them every week. Everybody pays me in cash, or they write me a check. I take those checks. I go to my check cashing center, or I go to the liquor store, cash my check, and pay my people. That's a hard way to do business. Granted, everything's off the books. There's no record of what you're doing, but you're not taking advantage of a system that's in place to let you leverage, your time and your effort. Time is money, right? It takes a lot of time to go to the liquor store and to cash the check, to wait in line, then go meet up with everybody again and give them their checks and do that every Friday or however often you're paying your people. Um, and with that, it was also hard to get to prosperity because, there was no record that you made any money. So if you wanted to get a loan or a mortgage or buy a car, you had to pay cash for it. As a result, that meant it took a lot of time and you would have to wait and save up the cash to be able to have any sort of claim of ownership on things that were greater than what you could, make in a week. We did not have any sort of credit or identity very often because we were operating on a cash business, on a cash basis. Everything was going from, handed from one person to another, and dollar in, dollar out. Hey, great, it worked. It worked in the neighborhood, but then when we wanted to start to do larger and larger endeavors, you can't do all that in cash. $100,000. You going to carry that around in a bag and walk in and pay for something? Yeah, granted, some people do, but it's not practical. It's not safe, and it's not really a great way, especially in this day and age when we have a few more protections for us of doing business. One thing that I also like to talk about is, how entrepreneurship is a powerful tool for us and always has been. It's a way for us to lift up not only ourselves, but our communities, the people around us, our friends, our family, and people we don't even know, right? And they oftentimes the entrepreneurial ideas, they come from the strangest places. They come because we're looking for opportunities. Going back to the focus conversation we were having yesterday, being able to have focus and stay away from distractions, all of a sudden is if I'm looking for opportunities, I'm going to find them. I had a hardship. I lost my job. I got to make ends meet. What am I going to do? Hey, you know what? They always tell me I make great pies. Maybe I should start making some pies and see if anybody would buy that. Who knows? I don't know a lot about running a business, but I know about making pies. Let's do it. And people go in and they start off and they get some lumps, but they learn. And part of the thing is you got to stay in that meat grinder long enough to take those punches, to take those lumps, and to learn the business of the business that you're in. What is it that makes people want to buy a pie? Can you sell pies online? Is it practical to ship a pie in the mail? I don't know. I've never tried to do it. Do I need a special license? Should I do a website? Or would a food truck be better? How can we get hustling and make this going? This is a business. And hustling is hustling in the sense of working hard is part of that business plan, especially in the early days. Entrepreneurship is hard. It takes a lot of work, but it can be very fruitful and multiply your circumstances. It's a great way and often spurs from hardship. You get laid off from a job. Something tragic happens and you need to make some money quickly, or you need to make additional money for helping somebody out. That's where a lot of these businesses start. They start at the kitchen table, the garage, a couple buddies at the bar, and they grow from there. The thing that separates successful entrepreneurs from people that are just playing at it is their dedication. I'm as guilty as the next guy. I remember Tyler Perry when he was putting out those terrible plays that would come out, and it'd be something along the lines of "My grandmama prayed for me," and tailored to the church crowd. The plays were awful, but that was his grind. That's how he got his start. And you listen to people now, and there's say like him or hate him, but what is said very consistently about Tyler Perry, the man worked hard. He was tireless. He worked and worked and worked and was dedicated to his craft. He was dedicated to learning his craft. He was dedicated to the system, and he was relentless. And he just kept going and going and going. Look at him now. He's got, I believe now, the biggest production studio in the country. Who would have ever thought that the biggest production studio would not be in Hollywood? It's in the South, in Atlanta, Georgia. Huh, interesting. Fun fact that I learned today is that it actually was a former Confederately named military base. So just think about that. A black man bought a military base that had a Confederate name and turned it into a multi-billion-dollar operation. That's how far we've come. That's how powerful entrepreneurship can be. Stay in the game, keep doing it. One of the things that's happened to all these people too along the way is that their mindset. They have a special type of way of thinking. Very often when we've been slaves, we've been held back, we've come up with things that were difficult. It's very easy to fall into a mindset of there not being enough. There's not enough food, there's not enough money, there's not enough seats on the bus, there's not enough pencils, there's not enough erasers. Whatever it is, all I know is there's always not enough, right? I can't afford it, we can't do it, there's not enough of that. In reality, the truth is there's an abundance of these things. The challenge is your access to the abundance, right? Little tweaks in your mindset can change that thought of scarcity of not enough to where can I find it, right? There's not enough pencils in this classroom, but Miss Johnson down the hall always has extra pencils, so I can go get a pencil from her and come back and still take my test, right? I just turned a situation from there not being enough to there being what I need to succeed in what I'm about to do. That's a very powerful lesson. Very often we go into there's not enough jobs out there. Well, maybe there's not enough jobs in your city. Maybe the factory closed. Maybe there's not enough job in your industry. Times are changing as we become more and more reliant on technology. A lot of fields and a lot of jobs that were very prominent and very lucrative 10, 15 years ago, they're starting to fall off the radar now. Is it time to get retrained, learn a new craft, do something else? People now are remaking themselves at an astonishing rate. And that's where we need to be. The constant learning, not just financial literacy, but in our self-growth, is also what's going to help to propel us to the next level of financial independence and freedom. Understanding what the difference is between an asset and a liability, and why each one is something that does exist in your life. Not everything you do is going to result in an asset. That's ridiculous. You're gonna have some liabilities. We have to live. We gotta have some fun. Clothes, liability. Car, liability. House, it can go either way. If you're living in it and you're paying the mortgage yourself, it's a liability. If you're renting it out and somebody else is paying the mortgage, it's an asset. That's a really good example of taking the same, one singular object, but depending on what your mindset is and how you're approaching that object, it can be one or the other. These are just a few things that I think help understand where we come from and how our financial well-being has been dictated by things in our past. We're going to talk more and more about us not staying in our past and looking towards the future. You heard me, I was talking about focus. We're focused on opportunities. We're focused on learning. We're focused on all the things that are going to make us better. Stay focused on them and we're going to move forward. For some of you that are more spiritual, life and death are in the power of the tongue, right? We've been speaking survival into our lives. Let's speak strategy now, right? We've all heard these statements before, and they go right back into what you focus on is what you manifest. It is not a secret. It's been used over and over again. I think the first, right there, the first reference being biblical. The first one I can think of in modern day print was Think and Grow Rich, about the millionaire mindset, changing your focus, changing what you're looking for, changing your opportunities. That's what's going to help you to grow. What I'd like everybody to do, and first off, thank you if you made it this far in the video. I'm proud of you. You're on your way to propelling your financial literacy and bettering your financial independence. And I'm gonna give you a little bit of homework. What I'd like you to do is maybe take 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes and just start writing down, all the things that you were told about money as a child. From don't talk about money with strangers, don't tell your business, don't put your money in the bank, put your money someplace safe like a mattress, a coffee jar. Never use credit. Debt is bad. Debt is evil. Credit cards are the devil. How many of these things have you heard along the way? I'm going to get mine what I can get right now. These are all things that we've heard that have affected our relationship with money over time because we've heard them over and over again. And I want you to write down, and then also things, rich people buy stocks. Path to wealth is real estate. Education is the key to, having a good life. And write all these things down, in a column on a piece of paper, or use your computer or phone or however you like to do it. And then I want you to make 2 columns next to that. And in column 1, you're going to have survival. And in column 2, you're going to have strategy. And just put a check mark next to each one that is, whichever category that statement falls into, and see which side that you have more. For a lot of us, we're going to have a lot more on the survival side because a lot of us, have been taught how to survive. Things have been about survival. They haven't been about abundance up until this point, and we're going to change that. And it's not a positive or negative or reflection on you, but it just tells you where your starting point is. And it gives you a baseline that we're going to grow from. And as we talk more and we have more conversations, it's going to get better and better. So stick with it. Remember, subscribe to the video, check us out on TikTok, and have a great weekend.